Harvey Weinstein, now a convicted felon in New York, and my colleague Jesse Weber was in the courtroom as the verdict was being read. Jesse, I know that it has been an extremely busy morning. You've been running around listening to everyone have their say outside that courtroom. We finally get a chance to talk, you and I, directly here. You were there. Set the scene for us. Who was doing what? What did it look like? Bring the camera into the courtroom through your words that we didn't have because the judge didn't allow it.
Okay, so let me set this up. An absolutely incredible scene. Now, we started the morning and things were slow. We believe the jury began their deliberations once again at around 9:40 a.m. And there is a courtroom packed with reporters. But between 9:40 and 11:30 a.m., nothing was happening. No jury note. Harvey Weinstein was in a separate room. The attorneys were going in and out of the courtroom. I had an opportunity just to exchange some pleasantries with them. The reporters were just talking about maybe we won't get a verdict today. Maybe there won't be decided. What's going to happen? And at about 11:30, I actually made a comment to a reporter that was right in front of me about when are we going to get the verdict. The buzzer went off, this phone inside the courtroom, and everybody gasped because that was we didn't know what was going to be. The judge comes in. He has a note from the jury, and he says, we have a note from the jury. They have reached a verdict. And at this point, I will tell you, there were audible gasps in the courtroom. It was at this point, throughout the, I don't know, what has it been, a month and a half, 2 months that we've been here, I have never seen the courtroom this packed, ever. I think they took every single officer that they could have found and put them in that courtroom for the verdict to be read. The jury came in. The foreman ultimately delivered the verdict. They did exchange some glances with Harvey Weinstein as they walked in and ultimately left. But when that first guilty verdict came down, Harvey Weinstein appeared to be stone-faced. There was disappointment across the faces of the defense counsel. And the level of typewriting, the level of people just trying to communicate what was happening in that courtroom was unprecedented. I mean, the scene on the 15th floor after we were finally allowed to leave the courtroom where the press conference was held by Cy Vance, it was a mob scene. It was literally like a concert filled with reporters and cameras and people pushing each other. I can't just explain the anticipation that was ultimately wrapped up here. This is a case that has been years in the making. This is a verdict that has been years in the making. There are people who have accused Harvey Weinstein of being a rapist and a sexual offender for years, but this is the first time that he has been ultimately labeled that in a court of law. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. And I should say, him being remanded into custody when he was picked up by the officers. He was surrounded by several officers, surrounded by his attorneys. They picked him up. I didn't see them handcuff him, but they did pick up by his arms and escort him out of the courtroom. He did not appear to be well. He appeared to be fumbling and almost stumbling when he was leaving the court area. And then we rushed out, all of us, to ultimately report on what we just saw.
Jesse Weber, an incredible scene and certainly a catharsis there because, as you said, this has been years and years in the making. Such a release of emotion, of tension, of legal liability, all wrapped up together here. So, Jesse, you said that the courtroom was packed. There were a lot of reporters there. Were any accusers present?
I didn't see any of the accusers. Obviously, Gloria Allred and Douglas Wigdor were there, who represent several of the accusers. But I didn't see anybody that we had saw during the course of this trial. For example, I didn't see Rose McGowan. I didn't see Ellen Barkin. Nobody who had made appearances or wanted to make appearances was there. And I have to say, a bit surprising, even outside the courtroom, we didn't see any demonstrations or rallies being held. Some of the reporters and I were talking about this as we were waiting in line today, how it's surprising we didn't see anybody, and perhaps when a verdict was announced, they would make their way here, but that's not the case. Harvey Weinstein, though, also didn't appear to have any support on his side. He did have attorneys, he did have his PR people, but there was nobody from his family or friends, from my account, who were there to support him. But his attorneys did try to console him, did try to prepare him for this as he was ultimately escorted out of that room. The judge had no sympathy. Donna Rotuno did make a plea in order for Harvey Weinstein to be on house arrest, in order for him to not be remanded into custody. She cited such things as his health issues. Apparently, she said he needs to take shots in his eye because he may be blind. The judge said, look, I have no doubt he has these infirmities, but he is going to be remanded, and he will be back in that courtroom on March 11th for official sentencing. So at this point, I imagine he is being processed and taken into jail, where he will wait his sentencing in a few weeks.
And Jesse, of course, this was a split verdict. I'm assuming that they read it in order, count 1, count 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the counts. So walk us through that process, because count 1 was one of the 2 most serious charges here. And when the words not guilty were uttered on that must have been a surprise in and of itself. So we go from not guilty to guilty. Walk us through that process of the reading of each one of these counts in turn.
Well, let's take a step back. Given the note that was issued on Friday, we didn't think that the jury was going to come to a decision on those top counts, count 1, count 3, predatory assault, which again means that Harvey Weinstein sexually assaulted Annabella Shora and either Miriam Haley or Jessica Mann. They were hung on Friday. So we didn't think that we were going to get a decision until later on. The fact that they came back in 2 hours and actually came to a decision was surprising. Now, they said count 1, the jury foreman stood up, said count 1, not guilty, which was surprising, but maybe not that surprising, given that they were hung. Perhaps at the end of the day, whichever were the holdout jurors ultimately said there is reasonable doubt, we can't convict him, and they settled. But as soon as count 2 was read, criminal sex act of Miriam Haley, which again means that Harvey Weinstein performed a forcible oral sex act upon her against her will, against her consent, that was a stunner. That was a punch to the gut. Then we moved on to count 3, predatory assault again. This one is Annabella Shora and Jessica Mann. Not surprisingly, not guilty. Then we moved on to count 4, rape in the first degree of Jessica Mann, which is that he committed sexual intercourse by the use of force. Not guilty. Then we moved on to count 5, rape in the third degree. This means that Harvey Weinstein had sexual intercourse with Jessica Mann against her consent for some other reason, not the use of force, not about age, not because of intoxication, but because she said no. She said no, and yet he pressured his way to have sex with her. That's third degree. He was found guilty of that. So we were just all reeling about that verdict. 2 big guilty verdicts. And again, as we've said, there is some significant prison time potentially for Harvey Weinstein.
Exactly. Jesse Weber, appreciate you sort of walking us through the process there. And your words just ring so true in our ears. I feel like I was watching it, listening to that description here. So you talked about Harvey Weinstein being led out. What was the demeanor like between the attorneys, the advocates in that courtroom? Because we saw them get into it a little bit outside when everyone was jockeying for a position in front of the microphones.
They were upset. They were upset. They were trying to figure out what the next move was. They didn't appear to even make a reference to the media. You know, a lot of times during the course of this case, Arthur Aidala specifically would say a hey out to different media reporters. He said hi to me. We've talked. But as soon as that guilty verdict was read, there was none of that. It should be noted that they spent a large portion of their time speaking with their client, Harvey Weinstein, preparing him to be taken into custody. This was a big moment for them and an even bigger moment for Mr. Weinstein. You can imagine that they were trying to prepare him for this, telling him we will be in touch with you later. You have to imagine whatever that an attorney says to their client right as they're about to be taken into custody. And there was this large presence of, I would say, 3 to 4 officers who actually helped Weinstein up and escorted him outside the courtroom. So the attorneys did not appear happy. My view was obstructed of Prosecutor Jonah Luzzi and Megan Hast. I couldn't see what their reaction was to this, but from the defense side, no one was happy, including their own team, which was in the front of the gallery. They had supporting attorneys in the front. Everybody was preparing for the next steps and how to handle this.
And Jesse, just to sort of go back to the reaction of Harvey Weinstein himself here, was he shocked? Was he saddened? Was he just stunned? What's the best verbiage you can come up with to describe him?
From what I saw, I would say stunned. There was a portion of my view that was obstructed by the number of officers around him, but based upon his demeanor and how he appeared and what he said, it appeared to be stunned. It wasn't a situation where he screamed out. It wasn't a situation where he jumped up. Nothing like that. I think it was pure shock. We've seen that before here on Law&Crime when we have the opportunity to live stream cases. The camera is on the defendant when the verdict is read out. I imagine it was the same thing here. Pure shock, because while we knew what we knew what the note was on Friday, it didn't have to be interpreted the way that a lot of us were assuming, that the jury ultimately had come to a decision to convict Harvey Weinstein. Perhaps he did have hope. I will say this, as he came into court today, I took a video of him. He appeared to be very nervous. This is not surprising. This is how he's appeared throughout the jury deliberation process, but maybe more nervous today than he's ever been. Didn't exchange that many words with the reporters, down to business, and he went into that courtroom clearly for possibly the last time as a free man that he'll be out in the open.
Jesse Weber, I know that you said that on Friday. You tweeted it out on Friday, and I believe again over the weekend that this may have been Harvey Weinstein's last free weekend as a free man, and that prediction was 100% correct, it turns out. Jesse Weber, appreciate again the updates from the courtroom. You've been watching this case from the beginning there from inside the courtroom for us. I need to take a break here on the Law and Crime Network. My colleague Angelica Spanos will be back here in the anchor chair for the next hour and a bit here this afternoon on Law and Crime as our live coverage of the Harvey Weinstein verdict continues right after this break.